In 1996, Bill Gates said, "Content is king." And boy, was he right. 3 decades later, it still occupies the throne. For lawyers, law firms, and companies serving the legal industry, content marketing and thought leadership marketing are a must if they want to build their books of business or increase their revenues. Hi, I'm Wayne Pollock. I'm a former AM Law 50 senior associate who discovered the world of content marketing and thought leadership marketing and hasn't looked back. In each episode of this podcast, I interview lawyers and legal industry in-house marketers who are doing big things with their content marketing and thought leadership marketing. This is Legally Contented. Welcome to episode number 9 of Legally Contented. I'm your host, Wayne Pollock. Most attorneys and executives at companies serving the legal industry don't really put a lot of thought and effort into their own personal brands. For most of them, their personal brands kind of develop organically over time. Their brands will be shaped by how they're known in the legal industry, which often will depend on the kind of work they do for their clients, what their colleagues and opposing counsel tend to think about them. Unfortunately, most attorneys aren't proactively attempting to shape their personal brand. They're not thinking strategically about how they can create a brand and then what path they would have to follow to see that brand come into existence. Well, my guest in this episode, Sarah Sawyer, is a little different. Sarah is currently a principal at Offit Kurman in Baltimore, Maryland. You're going to hear on this episode how Sarah set out from an early point in her legal career to intentionally build her brand. Now, I'll admit, and she will too, it helps that she was able to come up with a pretty cool brand name, Sawyer the Lawyer. But more importantly, pay attention to how she set out to create a brand, what she was aiming to create with her brand in terms of the impression that it and her legal practice will be able to create in the minds of the people that she serves, as well as her referral sources. And listen for how she set out to follow through on that plan over time, creating the content, meeting people, doing the legal work that allowed her to be true to that brand that she had set out to create in the first place. Here is my chat with Sarah. Hi, and welcome to Legally Contented. I'm your host, Wayne Pollock. I am joined today by Sarah Sawyer. Sarah, please introduce yourself and tell us all how you got to be where you are today.
Hi, Wayne. Thank you so much for having me today. And my name is Sarah Sawyer. I'm an attorney with Offit Kurman out of our Baltimore office. And my practice consists of employment law, litigation, and some mergers and acquisitions, general transaction work. And I actually started my career as a prosecutor, and it's been an interesting ride since then. I started in Baltimore County State's Attorney's Office, doing all kinds of cases, everything from DUIs to attempted murder cases, and really wanted to go and be on the business side of things and represent businesses. My father's a business owner, and watched him grow his business and was very interested in helping people like him and working with those types of clients. So left the state's attorney's office, joined Offit Kurman, and then I actually left for a little while, about a year and a half, and went in-house at a marketing agency called Warshawski. And then I came back to Offit Kurman the day before the COVID-19 pandemic started and everything shut down. So it's been an interesting ride.
Well, that's fantastic timing. I have to ask, what business does your father own?
He is a financial advisor. So he went off and he started with American General, Prudential, some of those companies, and then went off and started his own thing and has been successful. But I watched him grow that. Used to go to a lot of different conventions and things like that, and used to be the cute kid at the booth that drew people over. So,
were you cognizant of the legal issues or legal challenges that his business faced as you were growing up and becoming an undergrad student, a law student, and a lawyer?
Not specifically, but I would say that what I was really in tune with was the fact that the laws are the rules that we all play by. So if you make a game analogy, it's if we're playing a game, the laws are the rules of the game. And so that was really part of what really interested me in the practice of law, is that watching how that impacts businesses and impacts every single thing in our world. So I had an interest in politics in college and in high school as well, and just how the world worked and the rules that we all played by.
I asked you to join me because I think you are doing a fantastic job of branding yourself fairly early on in your legal career. You've been out of law school for about 8 years now, and congratulations on just being named a principal at Offit Kurman. So you're already hitting what we would consider to be significant career milestones in the practice of law. Yet I think you are way ahead of the game with your branding and your marketing and your business development efforts. I want to touch on that in a moment, but I want to walk back to your legal career, and I'm curious, what about the business of Offit Kurman and the firm itself, what drew you to there when you were at the state's attorney's office?
It's really that and thank you for those kind words as well. We appreciate that. And, it really was that Offit Kurman is an entrepreneurial law firm. So as I know you're familiar, a lot of law firms, you can't expect to be out in front of clients until you're pretty far into your career. You also don't have the obligation of having to bring in your own clients or even start trying to figure out the business of law instead of just the practice of law. And a lot of times you're spending a lot of time doing doc review or, being on doing a lot of the background work, and then over time you elevate and eventually you're expected to start trying to grow a book. Whereas the Offit Kurman model really turns that on its head and just says, start growing a book from the beginning. Let's teach you how to build your book, build those relationships from the start. And so that really appealed to me because I really was very interested in growing my own business as well as helping business owners with theirs.
How did you suss that out so early on in your legal career? As you're ready to leave government service, you're looking at private practice options. How did you come to the conclusion that that is even something, A, that you wanted to have at a law firm, and B, that Offit Kurman seemed like a firm where you could get that, have that culture and get that experience?
I'll probably return to my dad and his business again for that one. I mean, it was really amazing to see him grow his business and grow those client relationships, and really how fulfilling it was to have those relationships and to grow in that way, and be responsible for those clients and for the work that they're giving to you. And so that was something that was really interesting to me. And I just knew from a couple connections that Offit Kurman had that model. And so, it was fairly unique. And so that was really what drew me to it. And, really wanted to hit the ground running with building those relationships myself and, finding people to help with their legal needs.
Did you consider other firms when you left the government?
I looked around a little bit. I didn't, it's funny how things work. It's just you get, you have a conversation with, I was kind of looking to change and had a couple of conversations. And before I knew it, I ended up in an interview with Offit Kurman, and I was like, this sounds great. And then, ended up there. So I didn't really it wasn't too long of a job search. I kind of looked around a little bit, but that really felt like a great fit from the beginning, and made my decision fairly quickly.
How did you, as a junior associate or a mid-level, whatever you were that first go around at Offit Kurman for about 2 years, how did you see the business development culture, the entrepreneurial culture? Because I could imagine if you are a senior associate, you're a principal, it's different, right? I would think you're furthermore along in the client relationships. You see more, you know more. But I'm curious, as a junior or mid-level, how did you start to see that entrepreneurial culture every day?
Really including myself on as many calls and as many rooms and as many situations as possible is how I really started to see how other people did it, and to learn to learn really what the client's needs were. So I really just tried to fully immerse myself in the client relationships that other people had, and then just also to see what they were doing, how they were managing their client relationships. And it started just issue spotting. We are always taught in law school to issue spot. And so I just kind of took that to a different level, and started issue spotting in the world around me. And so, really just kind of, it was almost a game, for lack of a better word, of, all right, like I meet someone, what are their needs? What's their business like? What might they care about? What might be interesting to them? What stage in their business are they at? What are the needs that would most, match up with those goals and where they are in their business at that time, and just started trying to learn that way.
Did you have to be careful about stepping on anyone's toes? And the reason I ask is because at some law firms, there are partners who are very protective of their clients, mostly because they're probably getting origination credits from that relationship. And they're going to have sharp elbows. And I'm curious if the entrepreneurial culture at a firm like Offit Kurman would automatically mean that people aren't going to be that guarded because they want to teach their colleagues and they want to show what good client relations look like and how to actually serve a client, as opposed to just doing the legal work with your head, your head down at your desk. I'm curious, were you concerned as an up and coming associate that you were going to rub anybody the wrong way by showing this interest based on your desire to build your book of business and get your career going like that?
I didn't really face much, many challenges in that regard. Most people, given the environment of the firm and the stated goals of everyone there to want to grow their books of business, I found that people were very open to helping you learn and helping share what they've done and what's been successful. Because it is well known that most attorneys who join Offit Kurman do so because they have an interest in wanting to grow their own books of business. So it really is ingrained in our culture to the level that to the extent that people are willing to spend the time. That's always a question in law firms because time is quite literally money in law firms and build out law firms. So to the extent that people are willing to spend the time, I didn't face any challenges with them wanting to give me their secret sauce or their insight.
How did the Sarah Sawyer marketing train start turning its wheels as a junior associate? What were you doing to start that process that obviously you're still doing today, but what were you doing early on to get it going?
So I really, again, just getting in a lot of rooms, but also really stopping and thinking about what I want my ideal client to look like. Who do I want to work with? And what are the needs and wants of that ideal client, and also just developing a brand. So there's a lot of attorneys out there. I mean, there's tons of us. We're like financial advisors. We're everywhere. Every room you go into, there's lawyers. You can't get rid of us. They're everywhere. So really trying to figure out ways to distinguish myself in my practice and figure out what really my value add is for clients, and then just, also what I want my practice to look like, what I want my day to day. When we spend a lot of time working, and I really wanted to really develop a brand that was really true to who I am and how I want my day to day to be, and what I want my client book to look like.
So is that coming in the form of networking, putting aside the work you're doing, let's call it in the four walls of the Offit Kurman office? Is that coming in the form of networking? Are you writing articles? How are you actually getting that muscle going?
For me, it was a lot of conversations, networking, meeting new people, being in new rooms, attending events with speakers that on topics that were interesting, that would draw people that were also interested in that topic. And then having the conversations after, reaching out to people. I made a lot of use of LinkedIn, and in the early stages, I use it now even more. We're always learning how to use LinkedIn better, and but really just trying to connect with people and follow up and touch base with them, and then just having a lot of I always would just have follow-up conversations, really just trying to get to know about people's businesses and what their needs are. And even if it didn't turn into an engagement or they didn't turn into my client, I took that all as kind of learning experience to feel out those conversations and kind of get a feel for the business world around me.
You make a few good points that I want to revisit later on. One is the brand, and we're going to focus on the brand soon because Sawyer the Lawyer is just such a fantastic brand. We might not all have the good luck of having a name that rhymes with lawyer or attorney, but you take the tools and you use the tools that you're born with, I guess. But also you mentioned that sometimes things don't work out where they don't become a client today, tomorrow, next month. But it's important to play the long game because you don't know who that person knows. You don't know when that person leaves their current job or goes off and starts their own business. You just don't know what that network looks like in 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, 5 years. And to view it always as an if then, or to view it always as black or white, either I got the business or I didn't, is so short-sighted, because there's just so much opportunity out there and potential to grow relationships that you have to play the long game. And if you focus on the short-term stuff, like, did I get a business, did I get a matter from this client, or are people clicking like, or are they sharing my social media posts? It's all short game stuff, short-term stuff that you have to cast aside, because the long term is what counts. And businesses and books of business are built over the long term. The biggest rainmakers at Offit Kurman, the biggest rainmakers at law firms, didn't just snap their fingers and get millions of dollars worth of a book of business. They played the long game. It may have been lots of dinners, it may have been lots of ball games or rounds of golf or conferences, but they were consistent and they played the long game. And I think it's important to remember in this era of a lot of, short-term fulfillment and lack of attention span. You have to think at the long game. All right, so things are going well at Offit Kurman, but then you decide to go in-house for a couple of years. I'm curious how that opportunity came about, and what about that opportunity made you want to pursue it?
Yeah, so it kind of plays right on what you were just talking about, Wayne, is that that you never know kind of these relationships that you have and the opportunities they bring. But David Warshofsky, who is the CEO of Warshofsky, which is where I went in-house, he and I had gotten to know each other through some political campaigns while I was in college, and then after that. So just always had kind of stayed in touch. And their business was expanding, and we had lunch one day, and he had floated the opportunity to come in-house with the organization, be a part of the operations, and be a little hands-on with the business operations as well as the legal work within the organization, because it was a smaller business. So the opportunity to wear a lot of hats is what I would call it. And so it enticed me because as I love the practice of law, but I also really love the business side. And so it was interesting to me to go and do both, to be able to be more fully immersed in the business and in the day-to-day operations and the strategic planning and things like that of where the business is going, and really be fully immersed in the business in a more internal way than I am with my clients now as an external advisor.
And what kind of company was it?
A marketing agency.
So the reason I ask is because we talk about culture all the time. And even at an entrepreneurial firm like Offit Kurman, I'd have to imagine that going to a marketing agency provided a little bit different of a taste of culture. And I'm curious if you saw that at Warshofsky.
Yeah, it was very different. You get so used to being surrounded by lawyers. It was very interesting to be surrounded by lots of creative types, lots of people who had lots of different backgrounds. There was no one that, I came from being around people that all had a same or similar background to me, as people who just had these really cool skill sets and worked with a lot of really great talent there that had really amazing artistic skills.
So the reason I ask, and I wanted to draw that out of you, was because I have fond memories. I was in public relations before I went to law school. I worked for a PR agency, an integrated marketing company, for 4 years, from 2002 through 2006. And that was a fun culture, laid back. But my first exposure to the real world of work was as an intern the summer of 2000, right before the dot-com bust. I worked at a PR and advertising firm in downtown Philadelphia, which was still a classic kind of advertising and marketing PR firm. So it felt like a frat house and a sorority house kind of mixed together. It was such a laid back culture where like the creatives wore flip-flops and cargo shorts and t-shirts, but like the account executives who were dealing with the clients had to wear business casual. And it was just so funny to have that culture. Then I had it again after. Remember, this is my first experience in work as an intern. Then after graduation from undergrad, same thing. And then I go to Deckert after law school, a very prominent, prestigious law firm. And it's like, wow, this culture is nothing like what I had as a PR firm. And just funny to see how even in the professional services firm, in the professional services world, there's a lot of differences in culture. And it's funny for you to get that taste of what that kind of culture looks like compared to, again, even a relatively entrepreneurial firm like Offit Kurman. All right. So you're at Warshofsky. What brings you back to Offit Kurman after about a year and a half?
So it was a great experience. I learned a lot about at Warshawski. I learned a lot about, really just even being on the client side of things, being involved really in the day-to-day business. And then also did some hands-on marketing things, which was great. But really, I missed the full-time practice of law. And I also really did miss having my own book and having my own business inside of Offit Kurman. So that's really how at the firm that we function, is that we're a part of this bigger company and bigger culture. And obviously we have our colleagues and, and have the firm, but we also have, our own books inside of that firm and manage those relationships. And so really it was a hybrid of missing the full-time practice of law and missing my own little business that I was running. And so that's really what brought me back. And I had such a great time at Offit Kurman and had stayed in touch with all of my colleagues there. So it was an easy transition back.
Okay. So when does Sawyer the Lawyer, that brand and the content that you're creating under that brand, when does that start to enter the world? Was that at your second go around with Offit Kurman, or was that as an associate earlier on?
Yeah, it was. It was when I came back, and it was during the pandemic. We were doing a lot, because I was used to being out in the world. I was someone who was just always, out meeting people. I mean, I probably had 15 coffees a month, prior to the pandemic. I was very out meeting people, going to events. I really enjoyed that. That was something I enjoyed. So I would do it often. So then when everything shut down, really switched to a lot more content marketing, really trying to stay in front of people in a different way. And that's really how Sawyer the Lawyer came about. And people had always kind of had called me that. I had judges. One of my a judge that I was in front of often would call me Lawyer Sawyer whenever I was in front of him. So it was kind of a nickname. And so really just decided to embrace it and, really fit my brand well, my personality well, to kind of embrace the cheeky nature of it. And then Sawyer the Lawyer was born.
And I think it's important. And I want to dwell on this intentionally and for the majority of this conversation, because it's not just that you are going out there and networking and writing blogs or doing videos, which we'll talk about in a moment, but you're actually branding yourself. And we'll obviously have links to this material in the show notes. But if you scroll to the bottom of your Offit Kurman bio, there's some images and there's a link to your Sawyer the Lawyer blog site. And there are images of you that are not what you would expect a normal, quote unquote, normal big law attorney to appear in. It's more laid back. It's you holding a cup of coffee. It's you sitting in a chair and smiling. It has the feel of like an influencer. When you go and you see an information marketer, someone who is selling courses about how to pitch the media or how to build a business on Shopify or Amazon, it has a very informal, comforting approach to it. And it's a complete 180, I think, from most other lawyer content and lawyer blogs. And I'm curious, and I want to dive into this. You might take it for granted that you're doing this, that there's pictures of you in an informal way. But I'm curious, what kind of thought went into that? What did you think, gee, I want to be a lawyer for small businesses and large businesses. I have to come across as approachable. Like, how did you get through that strategic process and get to the point where you're at today with this imagery?
Yeah, so I really was, when I was developing those photos and the blog, I wanted to figure out ways to make sure that my personality came through in different ways. And so whether it be through the way I write my content, whether it be from my images, I think that lawyers often get into things have to be a certain way box, right? Where we have to, that's kind of the nature of lawyers and the way that our brains function often because of the work that we do. But really, I wanted to really, break out of that and really say, all right, well, how can my blog, everything I write, everything that I do really convey, who I am, my personality, the approachableness, because that's really how do I want my clients to feel when they work with me, and how do I put that through everything that I do? And generally the way I want them to feel is I want them to feel at ease. I want them to feel like they can have very practical conversations with me and get the answers that they need. And so, a standard lawyer photo used to be and still is in some circumstances, and attorneys sitting there with their arms crossed with the legal books behind them. And it drives me crazy when I see those photos now, because it's just, first of all, no one has law book libraries anymore. It's just not, it's not a real thing anymore. So it just feels disingenuous to me. And it's not to, I understand why that has historically been the way that people have done their photos, and depending on your area of practice, it may still be relevant, but really just trying to be relevant, approachable, but also just exude that, we're going to have practical conversations and get down to real answers for you.
It's fascinating that you have this brand positioning, because I do think that's very easy for lawyers to just think if they are doing the work and they're publishing and they're networking, like that's enough. And what I like about the Sawyer the Lawyer branding and the imagery is that it really conveys, I think early on when someone discovers you, if they didn't know you already, a comfort and a familiarity that you are intentionally trying to create. And I think anybody who knows you would get that same vibe from you, that obviously you're accomplished and you're fantastic at what you do, but you are not, the typical stick your nose up in the air, I'm too good for you type of lawyer. You're very down to earth and very approachable. And most attorneys aren't thinking that many steps ahead. They'll have their LinkedIn profile, they'll have their bio online, they'll have the articles they write, and maybe the podcasts they do or the videos they do, but they're not taking it that extra layer, that extra step, and packaging it in a way that reflects their mannerisms and their personalities. I think that's incredible. And I'm curious, how much of this effort were you able to do yourself versus how much did you have to ask for assistance from your in-house marketing or BD folks at Offit Kurman?
So I am the ideas person for sure with most of the things that I do. And then, our in-house marketing folks will add on to that. So, I'm notorious for coming up with a lot of ideas on long walks with my dog and shooting off half-written emails to my marketing director who I work with, who will then make a note of them for us to discuss the ideas. So she's used to that, but and then we'll talk through it and then figure out the best way to implement. So really, just I always try to put the goal of whatever idea I come up with front and center, so that way as a team we can work through if the idea that I had is the best way to meet what I'm trying to accomplish, if it needs tweaks, or if there is another way to meet the goal, or even add-ons to meet those goals. So
where are you drawing inspiration for these topics and these ideas?
Through a lot of my work with my clients and conversations that I have. So, when things are relevant to people and I see them keep coming up. So like in my newsletter right now, I have something, a little blurb at the top that says, what's keeping my phone ringing. And so in there, I will include, what I'm hearing a lot from clients, obviously just a very general statement, but, a topic that's hot that a lot of people are dealing with, that I'm getting a lot of calls on. So really that's a lot of it. And just trying to figure out how to be the best resource. So what's going to be the most relevant. During COVID, it was often COVID. It was often just what's going on with COVID. That was, especially in the employment law part of my practice, was getting a lot of questions around that. So there's a lot of content there, but just also what clients are dealing with in the market it's related to the practice of law, not always something that's a new law or a new policy or procedure, but also, the hiring crisis right now is impacting businesses. It touches employment law, but it is something that I often talk to clients about.
So I love a bunch of the things that you just said. One, I always preach to my clients and my colleagues and peers that today's conversations with your clients and your colleagues are tomorrow's blog posts or videos or podcast episodes. There are so many ideas and topics floating around from conversations you have with people. And there's a good chance that if one of your clients asks you a question about an area of law that you practice, there's a pretty damn good chance that another client might have that same question, maybe not today, but tomorrow or next month. And to be able to tackle that because you know it's on the minds of a current client, and then be able to point a client back to that post from last week, last month, last year is immensely powerful. To be able to say, oh, you know what? We actually covered that in a video last week, or we covered that in an article. Let me send you a copy because we know this is a big deal and we're familiar with this issue. That really says a lot that you are on top of your knowledge and your wisdom, and you're on top of the issues. But the trending part, I love that in your email newsletter, because you can't compete with Facebook or Twitter or any other social media companies that have the trending topics. You can't do it, right? You're one human being, or you got your team. But to be able to indicate what is on top of the minds of your clients or your colleagues or whatever, in a way, it's cross-selling your services, because you are reminding clients who might be coming to you for one or two things, even under the fairly broad umbrella of employment law. You might have clients coming to you for one or two things, but not realizing that other issues that they have that they're dealing with, you could handle as well. So the idea that you could tell clients, obviously not disclosing information, not disclosing confidential or privileged information, but you can walk through things that are on top of your clients' minds, is a great way to cross-sell and to remind your clients, look, these are things happening in the world. Maybe you should be thinking about them too, because if some of my clients are dealing with them, I bet you might be as well. Let's talk about the email newsletter. Let's talk about the content you're publishing, because you're doing a video series with one of your colleagues. You've got an email newsletter. You've got your blog posts. I'm sure you're doing some articles and external publications. Can you walk through the world of Sarah in terms of the content that you are producing and publishing?
Yeah, so I really try to think of it from a multiple touch points, multiple types of content, because everyone digests content in different ways. They're interested in different things, different topics, and receiving their information in a variety of ways. So I really try to do videos, some blogs, short form content, LinkedIn posts, sharing of other relevant topics, really just try to just stay in front of people with things that are relevant and interesting. Try to mix in some fun things in there sometimes as well. That kind of is in line with my brand as well. Sometimes some interesting topics that coincide with my practice area or what's going on in the world. You mentioned our weekly videos that my colleague and I do, the OK at Work series. And that really is a series where we really are just trying to just give quick, practical information, conversational, easy to listen to, not too legalese and jargony. And, people, with the amount of content out there, I'm of the mindset that if I'm going to provide something to clients and to an audience, that it shouldn't be just what you can read on some other, if I looked at the quick news blip about the new law, I don't want to spout that back to clients or to an audience. I want to say, all right, well, let me distill this down. What's the practical? What's the takeaway? What are the next steps? What do I do with this information? And so really that's, in every medium, that's really the goal, and just trying to hit all the different areas, different types of content.
Multimedia is important because so often we are reminded of the idea that people do business with people they know, they like, and they trust. And the written content can help you become known, and it can help you become trusted if you're consistent and you seem to be saying things that are authoritative and knowledgeable and wise. But that like factor is very hard to pull off with the written word by itself, unless you are an amazing writer who can write in an informal way that draws people into legal issues and legal discussions that aren't full of legalese and jargon. But the videos and podcasts, they're such a great way for you to come off the page and build relationships with people. And you hear these statistics about how podcasters have more of a familiarity with their listeners because you, the podcast listener, are at the gym, you're walking your dog, you're running errands, and you've got someone in your earbuds talking to you directly. It feels like one-on-one. Or when you're doing a video, or when you're watching a video, I can see Sarah, her mannerisms, the smile, maybe she makes a joke. It's different compared to the written word. So it's important that you explore the multimedia avenues. And in this day and age, it is easy to repurpose your content. You don't have to reinvent the wheel all of the time. You can take a topic, you could record a video about the topic, you could take that transcript and write a blog post about it once you fill in some of the details. That content, either the video and or the blog post, can go into an email newsletter. Then you could chop up your video, put it on social media, chop up your blog, put it on social media. There are so many ways to slice and dice the content that sometimes I think attorneys and some of their marketers get a little bit overwhelmed trying to think of, well, gee, how do we hit all these 15 different channels? You don't need to do 15 different pieces of content. It's just a matter of how do you create something once, a topic once, and then use it, slice and dice it, and use it for your benefit and try and reach the people wherever they are. Some of your clients are video people. Some of your clients are email people, and some will actually read a blog or go to your website. You have to be cognizant of that. How have you seen your efforts work? How do you know the time and the effort you're putting in to your marketing and BD efforts are actually bearing fruit?
So I will get calls from clients after I send things out a lot of times where they'll say, I saw this in your newsletter, I saw this in your video, and I'm worried about this topic. Can we talk about it? I also just out and about with referral sources and different folks that I run into in my other efforts will comment on the content. And usually that is a good sign that I'm giving them something that's relevant to them, or at least popping up. And I also just see really just the perception of if you see that people see that you're coming up on their feed all the time on like LinkedIn, or they are hearing about you, that it really, even if they haven't fully digested the content or the content wasn't relevant, it's been my experience that it's this touch point, and that was really when, talking about video and ways to really make the most out of it. I found a couple of times that I'd use video, and then I'd do, there'd be a blog that was on a similar topic, and then I would do even a PDF visual of some sort. So during COVID was a very good example where, we do an okay at work or a video on a change in the COVID laws and the regulations. We'd write about, I'd write about it as well, push it out, but I would also do a visual of like a flow chart or a, something with pictures to demonstrate the new regulation, or do it in these different ways, and then put it out in different places to kind of, get a lot of touch points in front of people. Because that's another thing that I've really seen is valuable to content creation, is that it's, some people are going to read it. I've got my clients who read it and call me and say, I'm scared about them violating the law. Like, can we talk about this? And then I've got, people are just going like, oh, Sarah's up to things. She's doing stuff, and she's out and about. What's she up to? And then they get curious and they start looking at your stuff, or they just are excited to mention it to you when they see you. So I think there's a lot of almost unintended benefits even. And I mean, they're intended now because I'm strategic about it, but initially sometimes they're unintended until you're aware of them.
I call it the cumulative effect of content, and meaning that you really shouldn't focus your content efforts and enter into your content creation efforts with the idea that every article will yield a new client or a new referral source or get you a speaking engagement. You have to view, again, the long game, and the idea that over time, the library of content, your body of work that you've created, signals to people that you are knowledgeable and wise about the topics you're discussing, because you couldn't be doing weekly video blogs for 2 years straight if you didn't know what the hell you were talking about. You couldn't regularly write a column for a legal industry newspaper or an industry publication that serves your clients. You couldn't do that regularly and consistently if you didn't know what you were talking about. So on one hand, you have this cumulative effect, and then you have the touch point, which I think is so key, that we think that people are going to see every piece of content that we publish. And we know that's not true, because if you look at some of the numbers, even from LinkedIn or Facebook, you know that the algorithm is not going to serve your content to all of your followers all the time. I think it's somewhere like in the 10% range. Any one of your posts will be seen only by 10% of your connections on LinkedIn. So you need to be out there and do it often. And there is a tangible effect of your email, your name, your sender name appearing in your clients' inboxes, your referral attorneys' inboxes, because they see, oh, to your point, oh, Sarah's up to something. They don't have to read it, but just the fact that you're showing up as a reminder, because you have to stay top of mind. And that's brings me to my next question, which is, do you feel like you have to work a little bit harder based on your practice group? If you were doing maritime law for ships that are shipping cars or vehicles, that might be one thing, but you're doing a lot of employment law. And I'm curious if you feel the barriers to entry and the barriers to marketing are lower, and thus you have to bring your A game even more than if you had a more niche practice.
I don't know that I have felt that it's too flooded. I think that there's the reason that it kind of returns to the whole branding exercise and really being really targeted and focused in what I'm looking for is that while employment law is a very broad topic, it's really, I've narrowed it in the sense of the type of content within that subject being different than, just so much of the content out there on this subject is often very legalese, a lot of jargon, a lot of those types of things. And so really just finding a way to be, have content that's different than that, with different goals, and not try to compete with, because there's all the big publishing houses, the big law firms, I should say, the big employment ones that are the nationwide law firms, the big guys, they're always going to write a really well written, really well done synopsis of the big laws that change, ones that I'm going to read to get some insight from them on often just when things first, because I'm curious what my peers are writing about. So instead of trying to compete with that, really just trying to figure out my own place in the content world and my own value.
Let's move to referral sources quickly, because you've mentioned them throughout the interview. And I think it's important to highlight them because we are often as attorneys focused only on clients, whether they're our past, they're our current, they're prospective clients. Talk about referral sources and what you're doing and how you're engaging them, because I would think employment law, I know I just said that employment law might have a lower barrier to entry and might be difficult to market because it's so flooded. But on the other hand, it is like the equivalent of the universal donor, I think it's O negative blood, where anyone can take that. In terms of a referral source, there's a good chance that if you're dealing with a business lawyer or a corporate lawyer that who doesn't do employment law, there's a good chance their client at some point will have an employment law issue. And I'm curious how you've navigated the referral source marketing world.
Yeah, so I really, I try to find referral sources who have clients that are a lot similar to the ones that I'm targeting or are looking for. And a lot of times, a lot of good referral sources for me will be other service providers for that reason, because most of the time, and with employment law in particular, when a company's growing, they're getting more employees, they're starting to, maybe they've done everything themselves up to a certain point. And now they're starting to say, hey, I'm a little nervous about this. COVID was a big one for that, for companies where they were like, oh, I didn't worry about employment laws that much. Well, now there's all these regulations and everything's really scary. What do I do? And so really just creating relationships with other service providers that meet the needs of those same types of individuals and that have similar approaches to their brand, really has been successful for me, because we build a relationship, we stay in touch, I help their clients, they help mine. And I really enjoy when referral relationships work that way, because it really is just great to get to know my referral sources and also be able to use them as a tool for my clients. And also just, a lot of times when I have conversations with clients, we're talking about all kinds of things, not just the law, right? That's my ideal. That's what makes me most fulfilled as well, is if I've got a client and they want to talk shop with me and they want to, really involve me in their business, then that's great. And that's very fulfilling for me. So to be able to have referral sources that I can call up and get to know different areas, even outside of the law, that I can talk to my clients about and then make introductions and really just get to know them at that level. And so that's really been my strategy there.
Are you focused on referral sources within the legal community, i.e., other lawyers? Are you looking at other services providers? For example, if you were going to work with a company, they're going to have, maybe they're going to have an accountant, they're going to have their financial planners or whatever. How do you determine which direction you want to go?
So it's mostly other service providers outside of law. Sometimes, some attorneys can be good referral sources, but because my firm covers so many areas. And also I should mention my husband's a personal injury attorney. So some of the things we don't handle, I also, I've got sources for. So it really, because we can handle so much and I can pass so many things off to my colleagues and keep clients in-house so often. Other professionals like CPAs, financial advisors, those are often good referral sources and also just good information sources for me as well, as I'm working with my clients. And so I'll focus on them more, and then also just other businesses and just I think a lot of my clients, I think of them as referral sources as well. So if we've got a good relationship, then I know they'll recommend me, and a lot of them have. Or as I think you may have mentioned, is that they leave and go to another company and they recommend me that company. I've had that happen a lot because they've enjoyed our working relationship. And so they want to continue that with the new company. And so I really see them as referral sources as well.
And that comes back to the point we discussed earlier about playing the long game. The referral sources and referrals from current clients are, I think, underappreciated by lawyers. And again, we often want to prioritize the short term. Okay, well, gee, this matter could bring in $30,000. That's a winning matter. Oh, this client has like a $5,000 project. It's not worth our time. But that $5,000 project gets you in the door to that $30,000 project that's coming up in 6 months, or you can do a bang up job with that matter. And then that GC or that business owner refers you to somebody else. And what seemed at first to be a $5,000 dud, or at least $5,000 not great project, ends up yielding in total or leading to $100,000 worth of matters and projects because of the referral capability and the referral angle. So I think it's a key point that attorneys often overlook, is that we think of referrals as a one-time thing. Well, this attorney will refer me a case. This financial planner will refer me a case or a matter. But looking at how clients can refer you and keeping those relationships in tip-top shape and doing great work, even when that particular project isn't in and of itself hugely profitable or sprawling, it still can provide benefits to you down the road. And you have to be mindful of that when you do your marketing, your BD, and you're developing those client relationships. Sarah, you have provided a ton of implicit guidance and advice, and I want to take a moment as we wrap up here for you to give some explicit advice. I'm wondering if you can give some tips either to in-house marketers at firms that don't have as much of an entrepreneurial culture as Offit Kurman, or to attorneys who are looking to grow their books of business. What advice would you give either of those parties about going about growing an attorney's book of business?
I would say think big and just do it. So I think often, we as attorneys, we're so much in a box. I mean, I mentioned that a little bit earlier, but really break out of that box and play around with it. Don't be afraid to get all the pieces aligned. I think as attorneys, we want to line everything up. You want to build your case. You want to make it perfect before it, leaves the door, goes out anywhere. So it's just sometimes it's just doesn't help with progress. You just end up, I want this to be perfect. I want to have this completely thought out. And it's not to say that you just do things willy-nilly, but, I would say just think big, try it out, play around with things. Some things are going to work, some things aren't. Learn from it and, kind of break that mold. Don't treat it like a case.
It took me an embarrassing amount of time in my life to come to the conclusion that yes, the perfect is the enemy of the very good. And We sometimes want to be perfect as lawyers, especially because we're raised as lawyers to not screw up, and one little mistake could be a huge problem and a malpractice claim. But when it comes to marketing and BD, like, it's okay to put out an 800-word post instead of a 1,500-word article. It's okay to have a 3-minute quick video instead of a 12-minute, well-shot, professionally shot video. It's okay to do that, because what's key is getting the message out and connecting with people while you can. And the more time you spend planning and worrying about what your final product will look like, there's less time for your marketing and BD to actually have an effect and to build those relationships that you are hoping to do. So I agree with you 100%. Sarah, thanks again for taking the time to chat with me today. For anybody who wants to connect with you, can you please give us your contact information?
I would say Google Sawyer the Lawyer blog and check me out there. You can find all my contact information there, my phone number, my email, all of those things, and connect with me there, and connect with me on LinkedIn.
And we'll have all of those links in our show notes for this episode. Sarah, again, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me, Wayne. It was a great conversation. I appreciate it.
Well, that's a wrap for this episode of Legally Contented. Thanks so much for tuning in. Check out the episode show notes for more information about our guests and for links to resources that we discussed during the episode. We'd appreciate your feedback and recommendations for future guests. Email us at hello@legallycontented.com, hello@legallycontented.com. We would appreciate if you told your colleagues about this podcast, if you subscribe to the podcast and urge them to subscribe as well. And while you're at it, maybe you could even rate and review the podcast on your favorite podcast player. Until next time, thanks so much for tuning in to Legally Contented.